So, hey everyone, welcome to another Shaping Africa podcast episode. Today I'm joined by Brian Waweru. Brian, it's such an honor to have you on the show, and I thought we'd kick it off by you giving a small introduction of yourself.
Awesome. Thanks, Rose. Thanks so much for having me. So my name is Brian Waweru. I am born and raised in Kenya, and I currently live in South Africa, in Johannesburg. I've been here for about a year, but in South Africa for now about 3 years. And I'm really excited to talk to you on this podcast.
Thank you so much, Brian. And I'm so honored that you agreed to do this. I know we shifted dates a couple of times, but I'm glad that we finally get to do this. So, as you know, this season, I'm talking to folks who left Kenya, went abroad for a little while, and then came back, and just to understand, how their journey has been for them and what type of impact they're having from coming back. So, curious to know how you ended up in the US.
Okay. So for me, my journey abroad started in 2009, when I was very fortunate to get an opportunity to attend the African Leadership Academy in South Africa. So at the time, it was a very new school. There were no alumni. And I really thank my parents for sort of having the courage to send a 17-year-old to a foreign country, and I'd never been in boarding school before. So I came to Johannesburg for 2 years at the African Leadership Academy, and that's when I really sort of opened up to the idea of exploring various opportunities around the world. And I think it was a factor of sort of meeting students from different countries who've grown up totally different. It really opened my mind to kind of the diversity of the continent, and made me a more curious person in general. So that was it was a formative experience at ALA for 2 years. And from there, again, I was fortunate to get a scholarship to go and study in the US at the University of Pennsylvania at the Wharton Business School.
Yeah.
So, I spent 4 years there in Philly. I did my undergraduate there. And then following that, I had an opportunity to start working in the States. So my first job was in New York at a company called Blackstone in their private equity team. And it was one of those sink or swim moments for me, where you're sort of thrown into the deep end in a sort of fast-paced, high-responsibility job. But I think the training I had gotten from my schooling, both at the African Leadership Academy and the Wharton Business School, was very good training ground for what was to come in the job market. I spent 3 years in New York at Blackstone.
Yeah.
And then decided to come back to the continent. And so in 2018, I moved to Cape Town, South Africa. I stayed in the same industry in private equity, and I joined a company called Investec Asset Management at the time, which today is called 91 Asset Management. And it's a South African asset manager that's been around from the 90s. They mostly do public markets, but they had started a small private equity practice to invest in the continent at large. So I joined the team there in 2018. I spent about 2 years there. It was an amazing experience. We were investing across the continent. So I covered investments in Mozambique, in South Africa, and I got to do a deal in Egypt. So spent a lot of time in Cairo. And again, just the curiosity and almost, sort of going to new countries, learning how business is done there, supporting entrepreneurs, lending my experience to them, was a very, very good experience. And then now, during COVID, obviously travel was much more restricted.
Yeah.
The idea of flying around the continent to do deals was a little bit trickier.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Africa is a big continent. So I sort of decided to narrow down my focus a little bit, and I joined a South African focused private equity firm called R&B Ventures. And now I'm a transactor there, and I've been there for about a year.
Fantastic. I want to take you back a little bit because it's something you glossed over. You are like, yeah, I joined Blackstone, like it was, I think people need to understand the significance of, just the fact that you got into Blackstone, first of all, straight out of undergrad. Like most people do the 2-year investment banking analyst position. And then obviously the fact that you were a person of color going into Blackstone. Tell us a little bit more, like how did you prep for getting into Blackstone? What was the recruitment process like?
Me a little bit back, but it's good. So when I was a junior in college, so my third year of undergraduate, I actually was interning at JP Morgan in their investment bank. And like you said, any young people who are typically interested in finance, investment banking is usually the starting point.
Yeah.
So I got into JP Morgan. I had a really good internship there. I worked in their diversified industries coverage group.
Okay.
And I had an offer actually to join them permanently after my fourth year of undergrad.
Yeah.
At the time, in that summer when I was doing my internship, I got introduced to a partner at Blackstone and to the Blackstone sort of general team. And they were actually trying to recruit 2 analysts to round out their analyst class of 4. So they already had 2 people who were interning there who were going to join them full time, but they wanted to hire 2 more because the company was sort of growing. They needed more people. And part of the criteria for those new 2 people they wanted to recruit was you needed to have an existing job offer. So the bar was already that high from the beginning in terms of who we were competing with for the positions.
Okay.
And so I remember when I went for my Super Day interview, there was about 7 of us, and everyone there had job offers from Goldman Sachs, from Evercore, from all these boutique investment banks, and from the bulge bracket firms. So the competition was quite tight, and I was very nervous going into the interviews. But you know what? I spoke to my mom and my brother, and they encouraged me just to be myself, right? And to be my authentic self.
Yeah.
And that's what I did in the interviews. I sort of went in, I told my story of how I got to where I am. I told them what my ambitions are, and I was really genuine. I think at one point in the interview with the head of private equity, he asked me, "So what do you want to do in life?" And I said, "I want to be an investor in Africa." To which he replied, "I know the head of the biggest private equity company in Africa. Should I introduce you?" And I said, "No, but I want a job here."
You're right.
So that's how authentic I was in the interview.
Yeah.
To the point where I thought it was bad for me.
Detriment.
It was a detriment.
Yeah.
And I think they somehow were attracted to that. And I was one of 4 analysts who joined Blackstone in 2015. And as you said, the only person of color in the team. We were a team of 50 in New York, and I was the only person of color. And it was a tough, I would say it was a tough introduction into the working world. Because the stakes were high, the pressure was high.
Right.
But I had good mentors. I had a good support system. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm so glad to hear. Now, I've never really heard you tell that story, so that was nice to know about the inner workings. So, how did you start planning your return?
Okay, so I think when I started working in the States, obviously the focus was on learning from the best
Hmm.
and making sure you sort of understand your industry, you understand the technical aspects. Um, and I think I was very fortunate to join private equity early in my career
True.
because you get to see the full spectrum of transactions,
Mhm.
and your exposure is extremely high. So I was attending 3 board meetings a quarter, um, and and I was learning a lot from literally the people who founded the private equity industry in the 80s.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So these are guys who've been in the game for a long time. They
Mhm.
understand deals, they understand structuring, they understand capital flows. And I think just being in that environment was such a good learning experience for me.
Yeah.
And it accelerated my learning curve. So
True.
I think after about 2 years, 2.5 years, I hadn't learned everything, but I had certainly learned enough to say I know how deals work. I know how the private equity industry works.
Right.
And it made me think that there's a huge opportunity in the continent to invest in private businesses and to help them grow and to
Yeah.
help them run their operations more efficiently.
Right.
Um, Especially in a continent like Africa, where a lot of businesses are young, maybe still founder run.
Yeah.
And so there's a huge opportunity to professionalize, to corporatize,
Mhm.
and to ensure these businesses that have been successful for 10, 20 years outlast their founders. Um, so I started having calls with different players in the private equity industry in Africa. I literally had a spreadsheet and wrote down all the players and kind
The
of
little
all the
tight.
emails. And
Mhm.
I know.
Uh-huh. I confuse you
I
because I'm
literally
the
had it.
same, but uh-huh.
And yeah, spent a lot of time sending cold emails, doing cold calls.
Yeah.
Um, and I think I approached it as, one, let me learn what people are doing in the continent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Let me come with a growth mindset and say kind of what's there, what exists, who's doing investments in a way that's kind of attractive to
Right.
me,
Mm-hmm.
and where's the best opportunity for me to not only apply the skills I've learned in the States, but also to keep learning because I'm still young.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and it literally took a year to talk to different firms. It took a lot of failed interviews. It took a lot of successful interviews that maybe, even at the end you say maybe I don't want to work there
Not the
because
right fit.
you're also not the right fit. You're also interviewing these companies, and it's a big decision to move
Yeah.
from the States where things are cushy, you're getting paid well, and you're taking a risk to come to the continent. So it took a year. It took a lot of meetings, a lot of coffee chats. Um, but I used to take advantage of anyone traveling to New York,
Yeah.
especially because the private equity guys, some of them are raising money in the States.
Yeah.
And so anyone from Africa who used to come into New York, I would try and have coffee with them, um, and just get to learn what's happening in the continent, because I think you can read the news, but until you meet the people who are living and breathing the day to day
Mm-hmm.
of working in the continent, you don't really get the flavor of what's
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah. Cool.
So it took me a full year, Rose.
Sometimes it takes longer, man. So
Yeah. So,
yeah, and let me just ask this now, because like part of the reason I'm starting this is in the end, I really want to build like a community and resources for people to kind of shorten that lead time and like give people exposure to job listings or just have them yeah, at some stage, I'd love to get your thoughts and ideas on that, because yeah, it's a little bit opaque if you're sitting in New York trying to figure out what's happening in Joburg or Cape Town or Nairobi. And so, yeah.
No, 100%. And it's almost like when you're living there, you have a singular focus, and it's hard to keep in touch with everything else that's going on. At the same time, be focused on sort of what you're doing in the moment.
Totally.
And I agree with you. Networks and just keeping in touch with people in those regions is probably the best way.
Yeah.
To keep abreast of everything that's happening, but also to start developing a thesis around what would be attractive to you if you ever wanted to make the move to the continent.
That's true.
And even if you don't want to make the move, how can you be engaged in that community? Because ultimately, you know, most of us, we moved here for pull factors, right? There was something that was attracting us back to the continent. And for me personally, it was being closer to home. So I'm not yet quite in Kenya, but at least I'm a 4-hour flight away.
Yeah.
So I wanted to be closer to home. I hadn't lived here as an adult.
Yeah. Totally.
I've missed weddings and funerals, you know, and everything.
Yeah.
And I just really wanted to be home. You know, it was kind of in my heart. And I think a lot of people go through those motions, but they end up not being ready to think about what opportunities look like in the continent because they haven't stayed in touch.
Yeah, for sure. And I think also people underestimate how long it would take them to get the right opportunity. Like, you know, for you, it was a year with all your qualifications, right? So can you imagine? For other folks, and like with like marketable skills in finance, right? So you can imagine folks with other specializations. It can take much longer.
I mean, the reality is, like in South Africa, for instance, the unemployment rate is 35%. And the unemployment rate for younger people is 55%. So the few job opportunities that are there are filled very quickly, and they don't open up very frequently. And so you kind of have to shift your mindset in terms of how you look at opportunities, and not just job opportunities, business opportunities as well, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Ain't
that the truth? So let's talk about that a little bit. So you land in Cape Town, right? You start at Investec. I'm curious, kind of, for you to talk about Brian day one Investec versus Brian today. Because I've been part of that evolution, but I want the audience to hear.
The reason I laugh is because I have such a vivid memory of it.
I just remember you sending a picture of your new car. I was like, bruh.
So, I mean, part of the move, obviously, when you come back to the continent, you want to enjoy a quality of life that maybe you couldn't enjoy in the States.
I think own that car in New York City. Where are you gonna park it?
Exactly. In the subway, like
exactly.
But so obviously the first thing that when I landed in Cape Town is also a little bit of a soft landing, I think, in the continent. It's quite a developed, city. A lot of things there. You can sort of Google your way around the city. So I got there, and first of all, I was excited about the pace. People wanted to have breakfast at work and lunch breaks at work, so that was really nice. But from a professional perspective, I think having worked in the States, and that's all I knew, right? I hadn't worked in the continent. I think you come in with a perception that most of the things are going to be the same, just copy pasted in a different environment. And in the States, I think companies there are so big that you end up, if you're not at a startup and you're at a big company, you usually have a functional role, right? You know, this is your responsibility.
Yeah.
And, you know, everyone else working at that company kind of helps along the way, and everyone is a functional expert.
True.
Whereas I think in the continent, you end up having to broaden your skill set just because there's not, you know, that infrastructure is not there. So it was I had to sort of take a step back and not ask why are things being done a certain way.
Yeah.
And stop comparing them to what I had seen in the US.
Yeah.
I had to sort of say, okay, how are things done here? And it was a journey to kind of evolve that mindset to say, how are things done here and why are they done this way here? And I think from a cultural perspective as well, I mean, I wasn't raised in South Africa. So there was also a little bit of that learning curve in South Africa of how business is done, how networking is done. And I would say that process took me the better part of 8 to 12 months. And it was quite the journey. I had to call a lot of people. I remember I talked to you about it a lot.
Yeah.
I talked to another mentor of mine in Kenya who said, look, Brian, we know you've had that experience in kind of one of the best investment houses in the world. To translate your experience here, you need to think about the end goal. So in your conversations with a CEO or a CFO, or with your partners in your business, what are you trying to achieve in those conversations? But then figure out how to get there differently, you know, in sort of in a way that's culturally relevant and in a way that works for the people you're working with.
Right.
And that was a huge mindset shift in terms of communication, in terms of understanding how to navigate the work environment here. And I would say I've really grown over the last 3 years to be able to achieve the same things I was achieving in the States, but just to go about it differently.
Yeah. And that point about kind of being open to expanding your skill set is actually something I really want people to have an appreciation for, because exactly what you said, and I think I mentioned it in one of the monologue episodes I did more recently. I think it was in part 1, where I encourage people to like look at your transferable skills, but then know that whatever job you get is going to demand more out of you than those skills, and be open to learning. Like, excuse me, for me, I was like, okay, I'm head of strategy and corp dev, right? Like, then I ended up doing marketing. And actually, I think that experience really grounded me in the reality of the Kenyan consumer, right? And understanding, you know, socioeconomic dynamics in a way that I probably wouldn't have appreciated if I was like staying in my lane, kind of trying to do deals for the company. So yeah, I think it's all for good.
No, exactly. You know, I think, especially, I mean, at a personal level for me, I had been used to hiring a lot of advisors to help with so many things in construction.
Absolutely, yes.
And then also having the internal infrastructure to leverage functional experts. I mean, if I just give you one example, you know, when I used to do deals in the States,
right,
we had so many functional experts that, you know, when we were looking at a new company, for instance, we had a guy who his expertise was on the healthcare insurance plans of the employer, you know, and he would go in and say, based on their healthcare insurance plans, I think we could save, you know, X million dollars a year.
I mean, this is the thing.
And we can switch them to this provider and we can change the plans to look like this.
Correct.
That level of specialization does not exist. It exists in the markets we're in, but it serves kind of the bigger companies.
Totally.
And it's not at the mid-market level, right?
Totally.
And even if the expertise is there in Africa, it's not like you would be willing to spend that type of money on a transaction that's $20 million or $50 million. Right?
Correct.
So then you have to come up with creative ways to still get to the same answer, but it makes you draw on skills that you might not have, or it makes you come up with solutions that you might not have thought about in those, in the States, right? Because you just call and someone answers the question.
Right.
So I think my creativity has definitely increased. My resourcefulness has increased.
Your what has decreased?
My creativity and resourcefulness have increased in the continent.
Gotcha. Yeah. Ain't that the truth? Yes. Yes, totally. Okay. So then in terms of your current work, what is giving you most joy?
Okay, that's a good question. So in my current role, so I work for R&B Ventures, which is the on-balance sheet private equity team of Rand Merchant Bank in South Africa. And we are part of the First Rand Group, which owns FNB, which is the largest bank in South Africa, West Bank, the largest fleet financing company in South Africa, and RMB, which is the investment bank. So I'm sitting as part of a much bigger financial services group.
Okay.
And the first thing that gives us as a team is we are able to leverage our network in South Africa, which touches literally everyone and everything.
Okay.
So that's been, in the year that I've been in the job, I've learned a lot about South African business. I've met a lot of South African businessmen and women who in my previous role when I was investing across the continent, I might not have run into. So it's been a great place to sit. From a day-to-day work experience, I think what I really enjoy is the purity with which our team approaches investment decisions. So every time we have to invest in a company or decide to do something big and strategic in a company or sell a company, the whole team gets together and we all kind of discuss and debate the pros and cons of every decision.
Nice. Yeah.
So historically, most private equity teams usually have an investment committee, and kind of the deal team just goes to the investment committee. But in our team, we have a team investment committee even before the investment committee. And I think it just helps me see 12 different perspectives of every transaction and decision that we do, because everyone has a voice, from the most junior to the most senior person in the team. So that's rewarding. And I think it's by virtue of the structure of our fund. So we are basically, I'd go as far as saying a permanent capital vehicle, right? So we don't raise capital and we don't have a timeline with which to return the capital. That doesn't mean we're going to stay in our investments forever, but it means that in a year where we think the market is overheated, we can sit out and we don't have to do a deal.
Exactly.
And when it's not an optimal time to exit an investment, we don't have to sort of force our way into an exit.
Okay.
And that structural advantage, I think, makes us do what's right for every investment that we have. And it gives us a really good relationship with our partners, with our CEOs and CFOs. And it's, it works out well from an alignment standpoint.
Yeah.
And then outside of work, I think the one of the most rewarding things I've found being back in the continent has been the opportunity to give back in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And the opportunity to meet other young people and kind of tell them your story, and they can sort of see themselves in you.
Yeah.
And I think just, circling back to how I left Kenya. So,
yeah,
it
I
was
was
an
gonna say, let's
opportunity
go
with
full circle.
yeah, it was an opportunity with the African Leadership Academy, right? That sort of got me out of Kenya and exposed me to all these global opportunities.
Right.
And now I've had the chance to come back and sit on the board of the African Leadership Academy, where I'm helping them with, thinking about financial sustainability. We've seen the organization go through a transition from the founder CEO to a new CEO, who's a Kenyan woman, Bilha, and she's brilliant. And so just being part of the organization at that level has given me, one, a newfound appreciation of how much people are working to sort of give opportunities to Africa's youth.
Yeah.
But two, how to lend my skills as an investor, as a strategic thinker to an organization like the school I went to, you know.
Yeah.
And there's honestly nothing more rewarding than that. And it's a role I couldn't have fulfilled if I was still in the States.
Absolutely.
Because I've got to do it in person. I've got to meet the staff and the management of the Leadership Academy, some of the current students. And it's been very, very, very rewarding.
Isn't that something? Yeah, I wrote on my vision board this year to inspire more people and give hope, because I really think that doing that kind of takes you beyond yourself in a way. I don't know, it's just, it kind of brings the best out of you. So I'm so happy that you get to do that for ALA. I thought that was such a full circle moment for you when you got on the board.
100%. And it's something that I really, really enjoy doing. So I've definitely had weekends where I should be free, but I end up reading and trying to figure out how to add value to ALA. But it's one of those things where I do it with so much joy, and it's so much fulfillment that that it doesn't feel like work. So thanks to some of my networks, I've been able to open up, internship opportunities for ALA students who had their internships rescinded during COVID because employers were struggling to kind of fulfill their internship offer obligations. But to leverage my network in South Africa with different people and to say, hey, we have this pool of talent at ALA. That was me a few years ago. I think you can benefit from a resource like that, but they can also benefit from you. And sort of we've been able to do that for a few students and alumni, and it's very, very, very rewarding. Very rewarding. Yeah.
Awesome. What's next for you?
What's next for me is to push the limits of my current opportunities.
Exploit them, yes.
Exactly. So, I think after a year into my current role, I'm finally feeling quite settled. I think we have the opportunity to grow a few businesses in South Africa globally, which is also quite exciting. So kind of helping companies here tap into my international networks, figuring out how we can, really help our portfolio in South Africa, I think is a big part of what I think about today. And it's kind of medium to long-term vision, because some of the industries we're invested in have long lead times in terms of geographic expansion. And I'll just give an example. So I recently joined the board of a biostimulant company in South Africa that harvests kelp in the ocean and kind of extracts it into liquid form to create a biostimulant, which is actually, it's quite an interesting industry, because obviously the global population is growing, food production is of paramount importance, but figuring out ways to increase yield without using chemicals is like a big thing in the crop protection market today.
Right.
So this company works on one species of kelp in Southern Africa that's found nowhere else in the world, and we're selling it globally to about 50 countries. So we have big plans to expand in the US, and kind of, I spend a lot of time with the CEO and with the board there figuring out how to do that, and kind of the impact it can have on climate and ESG. So we have a lot of interesting companies in our portfolio that have an African niche and have something to offer the world, and it's very exciting to sort of be part of that journey. And it's fulfilling all the ambitions that brought me back to the continent, which was, one, this is a place where we think growth. This is a place where we need a lot of job creation. Correct. And that can only come from, companies, especially in the SME and the mid-market space, growing, becoming more resilient, being able to withstand things like COVID.
Yeah.
And so, it's been a really, really exciting time to be on the continent, to look at companies weathering the storm of COVID. And that's kind of what I'm thinking about day to day and long term.
Yeah.
I recently got married, so that's been very exciting for me personally.
Yeah.
And my wife, she moved to South Africa last year, so she's also going through that, what we talked about earlier, that sort of mindset shift. And her finding her feet in South Africa has been really exciting. I don't know what else to say. You kind of caught me off guard with that question.
No, there's no right or wrong answers. I really do feel that, you've gotten to the right place in your current role. I think it's very much aligned to wanting to being an investor in Africa, and I'm so proud that you are where you are, and that we've journeyed through all the challenges together. So,
yeah. I mean, the other thing I'm seeing in the continent, which has also been interesting, is the growth of the venture capital industry.
Totally, yeah.
So I think obviously with tech and everything, I think the venture capital industry in Africa is poised for a lot of growth. It's obviously not something I do in my day-to-day role, but it's something we think about a lot.
True. Yeah.
And I think in the continent, long term, one thing that I'd like to be part of, no matter what role or where I live or anything like that, is supporting that venture capital industry in the continent. Because we do have a lot of entrepreneurs, we have a lot of sort of good ideas, good businesses, but we need institutional capital and institutional support to be able to kind of see those businesses through their teething phase, right? You can see what's happened in Silicon Valley now with sort of new companies just having all the right institutional support to to perfect their product and to make sure they're super sustainable.
Exactly.
We have a few incubators and a few VC funds in the continent, but I think there's so much room to grow it even more. So that's something I would love to be part of in the shaping the continent community that you want to start. It's something I'd want to talk to the guys who are experts in that field and figure out how to support them. Because I think from a private equity perspective, we know what more mature companies look like. and that's something we can be supporting earlier stage companies to know what are the right structures to put in place and when.
Totally. Yeah, I always say, like, as someone who is running a venture-backed company, like, I find VC one of the most interesting investment classes, in the sense that, you write a check to back a team, but it's unlike in private equity, where you kind of, put in the governance and go to a few board meetings and, agree on strategic direction, and the management team runs off and gives you guys lovely returns. In VC, you have to keep pouring into the team, right? Because there's always questions about product, business model, market. Like, so you write the check, but you continue to invest in knowledge and time, which I always think is fascinating.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
No, and I think that's what we need. It's more of a more operational engagement.
Totally.
And we need to figure out sort of how, because marketing is marketing, and IT is IT, and finance is finance, and that's something that I think there are a few guys who figured out how to standardize that and be able to provide that type of support to companies. But there's so much more opportunity for that, right?
Totally.
We don't need to reinvent the wheel with every investment.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay. So, parting thoughts. What advice would you give to someone who is in the US now and is either in their last year of college or working, grinding away in New York? What advice would you give if they're looking to make the transition?
So I think first things first is to take advantage of the opportunities that are in front of you while you are there. I think there's a lot of training available in the States. There's a lot of learning you can do there, the exposure, the sort of fast-paced nature of the work environment, and the competition. I mean, it's a very competitive market, and I think that brings out the best in people. So for me, the starting point is always, one, have you exhausted the opportunities available to you, and have you achieved what you wanted to achieve by going out of your country, out of your home country?
Right.
So that's always the first question I ask myself. And then I think once you tick that box, then you have to sort of deconstruct how you are seeing the world in the States.
Yes.
And you have to have a growth mindset when you're approaching the continent and say, what's happening in the economies there? What's happening in business? What would you want to do there? As opposed to trying to replicate whatever opportunities you have in the States on the continent, because I think that it doesn't work, and you'll find that you might not satisfy your personal ambitions, and your personal sort of fulfillment might not be there. And then, like you said, taking advantage of your home networks, the people who will be in this community that you're starting, and then physically visiting. I mean, at one point, I was at one of those Africa business conferences in the States, and someone asked Fred Swanica, who's the founder of ALA, a question, and said, Fred, we're trying to move to Africa. We can't find opportunities. What is the best way to do it? And Fred said to the guy, it's very easy to move to Africa. You just kind of go online and buy a one-way ticket to the continent. So at some point, I think you have to physically go.
That's the time.
Kind of where you come here for a week. Reach out to people on LinkedIn. or even just come and, just network your way around here, and live and breathe and see the opportunities that exist, because you can't read about them, right? So yeah, I think people should just put their head down, pursue the opportunity.
Yeah, get a spreadsheet with a list of people I want to talk to.
Yes, have a spreadsheet.
Yeah. Yeah.
But really, I think the core of it is to be open and to look at the landscape, kind of spend time looking at the landscape. And then the last one I would add is, one thing you shouldn't give up when you move to the continent is learning, especially if you're younger in your career. So the thing I would ask people to think critically about is, when you move back to the continent, who are you working with? Who are the people you're working with? Mm-hmm. Do you think you can learn something from them, and why? Mm-hmm. And I think if you get that right, the other challenges you will surmount. Mm-hmm. But you don't want to be in a situation where you're not learning in whatever company you work in. I mean, especially at my career stage, I think when you're younger, you need to keep learning. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And learning comes in different ways. Either you're working with people who are experts, or you're being given responsibility that's forcing you to sort of self-learn, right? So I think when you're evaluating different opportunities, you have to tick one of those boxes. Am I being given responsibility that's going to force me to teach myself things? Or is there a career trajectory that will make me learn a lot? Or two, am I working with people who I can really learn a lot from?
Right.
And I think those two things can really calm all the other questions that, there's so many lingering questions when you want to move your life to a different country. Mm-hmm. But I think the one thing that for me, my one true north is always like, am I learning? Mm-hmm. And am I growing? So that's the one thing I would tell people to focus on.
That's really good advice. Thank you. Yeah. So I guess we can end it here. Thank you so much, Brian, for your time and for sharing so openly. Where should people go to keep in touch? Do we follow you on LinkedIn or?
LinkedIn is perfect. LinkedIn messages. I always read my LinkedIn messages.
Yeah. And now there's like a follow. We don't have to connect. We can just follow you. I love that follow button. Yeah.
I saw that recently. Follow. Yeah. And then obviously, I mean, once this community gets going, my email, I'm sure, will be on there. So I would be happy to get in touch with people directly, because for me, I think looking back over the last 10 years, it's always been a 1-hour conversation that's shifted my mindset. So you talk to a lot of people, but there'll be that one person you talk to for an hour who might just make you think differently. And so I still do it today. I still reach out to people, talk to people. So yeah, I'm always happy to have a conversation for 30 minutes, for an hour with anyone. Yeah.
I just thought of someone I need to connect you to, because they've just transitioned from PE to VC, but we'll talk about that offline.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. You know them. You just need to get back in touch with them. It will be public, their new role, sometime next year, so you guys should definitely connect.
Lovely.
Yeah, but thank you so much for your time, Brian. I appreciate it so much. I know you're really busy this weekend, so I'm gonna let you go catch up with your reading. And I'll be sure to tag your LinkedIn in the show notes when we release this. I think it should come out on Thursday, actually.
Oh, lovely. Okay, awesome. Thanks for having me. It's always good to reflect, and I feel like I've reflected a lot on this call.
Umetoka mbali, as we say in Kiswahili. You come from far.
Yeah, and it's just been very quickly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, love to Vicky, and enjoy your weekend.
Cheers.
All right,
Thanks,
cheers.
Rose.
Take care.
Okay.
All right, bye.
Bye.